Well, good afternoon and welcome to another edition of Lunch and Learn, and welcome to our audience and also our virtual audience out there in Facebook and YouTube land. We are very lucky today. I applied through NASA, and we're one of a handful of museums that got picked to get an expert to talk to us today about the Artemis rocket program. So we're excited about that. But let me tell you about some exciting things coming up. First of all, I'm David Dundee. I'm Director of Education and also astronomer. In fact, I only have to do those two titles for just a few more weeks because we've hired a brand new astronomer who will be joining the staff in just a few weeks. And Miss Carissa Zadinsky is coming down from Chicago, and was at the Adler Planetarium and the Carnegie Institute before here, and will be joining our staff starting October 4th. So you'll be seeing her around doing astronomy programs here, so I'm excited about that. And also, as two astronomers in the building, we can gang up on the one geologist left. But anyway, I want to tell you about some cool things coming up here at the museum. Our next Lunch and Learn, which will be on October 20th, is going to be done by our executive director, Jose Santamaria. He's going to be talking about Graves Mountain Revisited, and so he'll be talking about some of his adventures out there collecting rocks on Graves Mountain. And then also coming up this week, on Friday night, we have our opening of Thomas Edison's secret lab in my backyard. We'll have extra activities. The observatory will be open. We'll have planetarium shows. Museum will be open. And we'll have Mad Scientist performance in our big theater. So come and enjoy that. It'll be lots of fun. As we move on a little bit later on, I do want to let you know our next big here at the museum is Heavy Metal in Motion on October 9th. We'll be bringing big machines here to the museum. We'll have a number of big things from fire engines to SWAT vehicles. SWAT team is bringing a SWAT drone. We'll have 3 different helicopters landing, Army helicopter and Airlinger's Life Flight helicopter and State Patrol helicopters all coming and going during that day. So we'll have a lot of exciting things happening that day. And also, if you are a scout, we have scout programs coming up in October. You might want to consult our website. We have some cool scout programs coming up. And I also want to remind you that our program today is done thanks to the generous support of our sponsors. And today's sponsors for the Lunch and Learn is Century Bank of Cartersville and Marriott Courtyard of Cartersville, and also Homelight. And so we're very appreciative of their support for this event today. So let me introduce to you our main event, our NASA engineer who is working on the Artemis program, and this is Nicole Herman. And she began her career NASA headquarters in various roles, supporting future human exploration over the past 14 years. Nicole is currently the Technical Integration Manager for Human Exploration, Development, and Operations at the NASA Marshall Space Flight Center in Huntsville. If you've never been over to the Huntsville Space Center, it's a very cool trip. I encourage you to go over there and see the museum and tour that site. In this role, Nicole supports the technical and programmatic integration as well as strategic planning for NASA's human exploration of activities at Marshall, and she's currently serving on a temporary assignment as Deputy Manager for the Exploration and Transportation Development Office. So let's now I'm going to hand the program over to Nicole. Welcome, Nicole, to tell us, both our virtual audience and in-house audience. So glad that you're here today.
Hi, good morning, good afternoon. Thanks for having me. Thanks for that warm welcome. I'm really excited to be here today and to talk to everyone today about our Artemis program and how NASA is preparing to return to the moon. Before we jump in, we just have a short video to share with folks, so we'll just flip to that real quick.
50 years ago, we went to the moon. We called it Apollo.
What many people don't know is that Apollo had a twin.
She was a woman named Artemis, goddess of the moon.
We are returning to the moon
As a new generation of explorers,
this time to stay.
And to prepare to achieve humanity's next giant leap of sending the first human missions to Mars.
We believe our course will redefine what is possible.
That we would discover life-saving,
earth-changing science.
And that the challenges ahead will inspire generations.
This is our manifest.
For all who wondered if we could return.
For all who dreamed of pressing beyond.
This is your calling.
We go for all of America.
We go.
We go as the Artemis generation.
We go.
It's exciting stuff. I'm very excited about it. It's a great time to be working at NASA, to be working for our space program, and to be involved. And yeah, I'm excited to talk to you guys about this today. But just want to tell you a little bit more about myself before we get started. I was born and raised in New Jersey, in South Jersey. I actually have a lot of family in Georgia, in Metter and Savannah and Roswell, so I get to visit Georgia quite a bit. But I'm living in Huntsville, Alabama now, at the working at the Marshall Space Flight Center. I went to school for my undergraduate degree at the University of Maryland, and I studied history and astronomy, and I really wasn't sure what I was going to do with those areas of study, but I found an internship actually at NASA headquarters in Washington, D.C. in their history office, and so that was a way for me to combine both of my interests and start a career at NASA. And so I worked in the history office for a year, and then I started with other internship opportunities at NASA headquarters. And then I went back to school, went to graduate school to study science and technology policy and then space policy right in Washington, D.C. And then I later went back for another master's degree in systems engineering just to have a little bit more of a technical understanding of a lot of the work that I was doing. So I learned the policy side of things and then also wanted to learn a little bit more about the technical side. I ultimately spent 12 years at NASA headquarters, as you heard in my short bio, supporting our future exploration programs, a lot of the planning activities that go into that for our human spaceflight missions. And then about almost 2 years ago, I came to Marshall Space Flight Center to just learn a little bit more about the agency, to have some more experiences. And so that is where I am today. Next slide. So, before we jump into the Artemis program, it's important to understand, what does NASA do? And so NASA stands for the National Aeronautics and Space Administration. And so when we think of NASA, we think of our astronauts and our human spaceflight missions, but there's a lot that NASA does. NASA builds satellites to explore other planets in deep space. NASA is responsible for studying airplanes and technology development to make sure that airplanes are safer for air travel. We send probes to the sun, and so, but we're also working on those programs to send humans to the moon and beyond. Next slide. NASA's been around for a long time. There's more than 60 years of history. NASA was established in 1958, and there's been a lot of exciting achievements along the way, landing on the moon, building the space shuttle, building the space station, sending rovers to other planets, exploring our solar system with satellites, and then the retirement of the space shuttle, which kind of began this new era of human exploration within the last decade. Next slide. So NASA's all over the country, and so NASA has what are called field centers, and so there's NASA headquarters in Washington, D.C., where I started, and then the other centers around the country focus on various aspects of what NASA does. And so you have some centers that are focused on research and development and doing a lot of that research in the labs. You have other centers that are responsible for building the spacecraft. Our Johnson Space Center in Houston has our Mission Control Center. Kennedy Space Center is where we launch our rockets from. I'm at the Marshall Space Flight Center. We're responsible for, we're building the large rocket, which I'll talk a little bit about. But each of these centers contribute to NASA's goals and building the spacecraft and the operations that are required to kind of pull all of those pieces together so that we can explore. And so Earth, we've got to start on planet Earth, my personal favorite planet. I've been asked that question before. But there's a lot of interesting things that we can learn about our home planet, and people forget that a lot of what NASA does focuses inward and studies our home planet. And we also are studying all the other planets in our solar system, and there's a lot we can learn from studying our planet and the other planets to see how those are evolving over time and maybe what the future of our planet looks like. And so before we venture out, though, into deep space, we really have to start somewhere. And a lot of most of our human spaceflight active work right now is on the International Space Station. And so the International Space Station has a full-time crew of astronauts that live and work there every day, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, usually a crew of 6. It's orbiting 220 miles above the Earth's surface. And it's the largest spacecraft that's ever been built and the largest inhabited object ever to orbit the Earth. And over time, we've hosted more than 200 people from more than 15 countries. And so space station is very exciting. But the space station really is critical now as we look towards exploring farther out, because there's a lot that we can learn from living and working in low Earth orbit on the space station. And so there's a lot of fundamental work that we need to do, because before we go out farther into the solar system, it's good to be close to Earth, where we can learn how to, for instance, operate the vehicles and the spacecraft in proximity to Earth. There's a lot of things that we need to learn about the human body, about how the body operates in space compared to how it will operate in deep space. So if you think about our human body, we were designed to be in gravity and to be on Earth. And so when you put the human body in an environment where there's no gravity or very low gravity, there's a lot of things that can change within your body. And it's important for us to understand and really do our research on those before we send humans into space for years at a time at farther distances. And so we use the space station to really understand the space flight effects on our body. Habitation. We need to learn how to build houses for people in space. And so, our closest in space habitat is the space station. And so we're learning how to build that so that we can build habitats on other planets and in deep space. Space operations. We need to learn how to live, and not just live in space, but to work in space. How do we build the spacecraft? How do we repair spacecraft in space, in space suits? What kind of tools do you need? And so this is a lot of what we're doing on the space station. Communications. So as you go farther out into space, it becomes more difficult to communicate. And so right now there's a time delay when we talk to the folks on the space station. It's just a couple of seconds. But when you go farther and send humans to the moon, that can be a couple of minutes in terms of how long it takes to have a conversation back and forth. And then when we go to Mars, that's an 8-minute time delay. And so, we have to learn how to operate in those environments on the space station so that we can prepare for that when we go to Mars. Human health. How are we going to keep astronauts strong? And so we're using the space station we have built what kind of exercise equipment do you need in space? What are the right nutrients that we need to provide our astronauts to keep them healthy? We're doing a lot of technology development. How do you do experiments in space? We're going to space to learn about our environment and about our world, but we need to understand how to perform those experiments. And so doing technology development in that area is very important. And then food growth. We can't take all of the food that the entire crew will need with them for a 3-year mission. That's very heavy. It takes up a lot of space on a small spacecraft. And so we have to learn how to grow our own food while we're in space. And so we've got research on the space station, you see in that picture there, of growing plants and learning how to do that in a way that's sustainable for the future. And so the moon, that is our next destination. And so the work that we're doing on the space station and in low Earth orbit today is going to help us get back to the moon. And then you heard a little bit in in that short video about the Artemis generation and the Artemis program. And so Artemis was the twin sister of Apollo. If you remember, the Apollo program brought astronauts to the moon back in the 60s and early 70s. And that mission was really to see how quickly we could get to the moon, plant our flag, and come home. But now the Artemis program is different. We want to not only land the first woman and the first person of color on the moon, which will be extraordinary, but we want to go back to the moon to stay for long periods of time and to expand our human presence into the solar system. And so really Artemis encompasses so many activities that NASA and our international partners and our industry partners and universities are focused on, and includes, and I'm going to talk about some of these in a little bit more, but what are we going to do on the surface, the spacecraft that we're building around the moon, the gateway, all of our ground systems, the rockets that we'll need for Artemis. We need new spacesuits to explore the moon. And ultimately, this leads to setting up what we're calling the Artemis Base Camp. And so I'm going to talk a little bit about each of these pieces of the Artemis puzzle. So the Space Launch System rocket. So the Space Launch System is going to be the largest rocket that's ever been built. And so NASA is building that today. It's getting ready to launch, hopefully by the end of this year. It is going to be a spacecraft that is capable of not only sending humans to deep space, but also taking the large systems necessary to live and work in space. So it'll be able to send crew as well as large habitats, large rovers, other types of spacecrafts and landers to help us explore the moon and to Mars. It's also going to have the capability to deploy and to carry what are called CubeSats. So CubeSats are small spacecraft that are about the size of a shoebox or like one of the drawers in the bottom of your fridge. And so CubeSats are a way for small experiments and other types of smaller missions to be delivered to deep space on the Space Launch System rocket. And so it provides a lot of opportunities for science, which will also be part of our Space Launch System. And so just to give you an idea of how big this rocket is, so the one in the middle, the SLS Orion, we're calling it Block 1, that's going to be 322 feet tall. So it's a little bit shorter than the Apollo Saturn V rocket, but it's going to be extremely powerful. And so it's going to be able to carry 154,000 pounds of supplies and cargo to deep space. And to give you an idea of how big that is, that's about 12 elephants. So just kind of imagine 12 elephants on that rocket and shooting them into deep space. It's pretty powerful. But then when we want to go on future missions to Mars, we have our our SLS Block 2, which is that largest one right there. That's going to stand at 364 feet tall, and that will be able to carry even more payload, 286,000 pounds of supplies and cargo, which is about 22 elephants. So it's pretty significant, and it's a pretty powerful rocket. Next slide. And so these are just some progress pictures. So we are close to launch. So these are some pictures of the Space Launch System rocket from, I think these look like they're from Monday, I believe, September 20th. And so this is the Kennedy Space Center in the Vehicle Assembly Building. They are getting the Space Launch System ready for launch, performing some final testing and putting it all together, and they will get ready to launch hopefully by the end of this year. So we'll just keep an eye on that, but it's going to be very exciting. Next slide. This is the Orion Capsule. So the Orion spacecraft is built to carry humans into deep space and take them farther than they've ever gone before. And so this Orion spacecraft will actually be launched on top of the Space Launch System and carry the crew to deep space. And so for this first mission of SLS and Orion is called Artemis 1. And this will be the first mission, and it'll be a test flight. So there will not be any crew on this first Artemis 1 mission, but it will be the first flight of the Orion spacecraft on top of the SLS. We're really looking forward to that. So we're going to just watch another quick short video about Artemis 1.
3, 2, 1, 0. Mission liftoff.
Artemis 1 will lift off from Launch Pad 39B at NASA's Kennedy Space Center in Florida with 8.8 million pounds of thrust provided by the most powerful rocket in the world, our Space Launch System rocket, or SLS. The uncrewed flight will be the first integrated test of SLS, our new Orion spacecraft, and exploration ground systems at Kennedy. Artemis 1 will send Orion beyond the moon, 280,000 miles from Earth, farther than any human spacecraft has ever flown.
This is not NASA doing this. This is the United States of America doing this program, the Artemis program, and there are companies all across our country that have a part in it, so there is kind of this wave of excitement being generated just by saying, we're going back to the moon.
After the upper stage of the rocket separates from Orion, the upper stage will deploy small satellites over several days to perform science experiments and technology demonstrations. Orion will make its multi-day outbound trip to the moon, propelled by a service module provided by the European Space Agency. Engineers will test Orion's systems on the way to the moon. Then, Orion will fly about 60 miles above the lunar surface, using the moon's gravity and engines on the service module to enter a lunar orbit. After about a month and a total distance of over 1 million miles, Orion will return home, faster and hotter than any spacecraft has before. A primary goal of Artemis 1, ensure Orion safely returns to Earth before we fly with humans. When we do, we'll build our capability for sustainable lunar exploration, preparing us for missions farther into the solar system.
Initially, what we'd like to do is start establishing a presence on the moon. So we're going to establish going back there on a regular basis, and then we'll end up setting up Gateway, and we would launch to the Gateway, and from Gateway, land on the surface of the moon.
We are there for, weeks, months on end. And there, we're going to be able to test out all the hardware and the habitats and the hatches and the suits and the rovers that'll allow us to prove out those technologies. The moon will lead the way to Mars, and we should be there within the next couple of decades.
Pretty exciting stuff. It's always great to see that. And so, it's a lot closer than we think. And so, following Artemis 1, Artemis 2 is going to be the first crewed flight in the vicinity of the moon. So the Orion spacecraft, like you saw in the video, will fly aboard the SLS, and it'll send crew back to the moon. And then this is just a great picture of our astronauts preparing in the one of the Orion mock-ups at the Johnson Space Center. And so we have our astronauts are training and getting ready for those missions. And then Artemis 3 is going to be the first flight and landing back to the surface of the moon. And so NASA will land the first woman and the first person of color, like I said before, on the moon. So Orion will launch on the SLS. It will take the crew to deep space and then deliver the crew to what's called the Human Landing System. And so this is just an artist's concept of the Human Landing System. And so this will be able to carry 2 of the crew to the surface. So there'll be 4 crew delivered to deep space. 2 of the crew will stay in space, and then 2 will be delivered to the surface. And then the lander also serves as a short-term habitat for the crew for these early surface missions, because they won't be spending that much time on the surface initially. We have to gradually build up to those longer missions. And so, but they'll be able to conduct spacewalks or moonwalks do some sample collection, and do some scientific experiments while they're on the surface for those initial missions. And then our gateway, you saw a little bit about the gateway in the video. So the gateway, the spacecraft on the right-hand side there, is going to be a platform that's going to be built in orbit around the moon. And so it's going to help us establish that sustained human presence on and around the moon. And it's a critical component of our Artemis program, where we're going to be able to have a rendezvous point for visiting vehicles for the Orion spacecraft to deliver humans to cislunar space for experiments, and a waypoint for astronauts even on their way to Mars someday. And so, next slide. So we're building this gateway with our international partners, just like we built the space station with our international partners. And so we're gradually building up that capability, and we're going to be, we're working with, for instance, our Canadian partners to provide, they're going to be providing a robotic arm. Our European and Japanese partners are going to be working to build a habitat for the gateway. And so it's really been a wonderful international partnership and a true global effort to send humans back to the moon and back to deep space. And so Artemis Base Camp, so what will we do on the moon? So initially, as you saw, we'll have, just the lander with a couple of crew to explore initially. But what we want to do is get to this permanent human presence on the surface. And so that's going to take a gradual buildup of systems and activities on the surface over several missions to deliver those. And so each Artemis mission will subsequently deliver a new piece of that hardware. And will also help us test out our capabilities for those future missions to Mars. So we will have spacesuits, habitats, landers, rovers, and other systems to help us not only learn how to live and work at the moon, but help us prepare for those missions to Mars. And so everything that we do and learn during these Artemis missions, and even what we're doing in LEO and low Earth orbit on the International Space Station, will help us pave the way for those future missions to Mars. But let's not forget, we've been on Mars for a long time, and so NASA has been continuously exploring Mars for more than 50 years, and we've had a robotic presence on the surface of Mars since 1997. And so what these, box before boots, it's important for us to have, to take these lessons learned, to understand, not only the atmosphere of Mars, but the surface of Mars, and to use the data that we've gotten back from studying Mars and from our rovers landing on Mars to help us build the systems that we're going to need to explore with humans. And they're, sending us information back about, potential landing sites and the climate of Mars, just so that we can make sure that we are prepared for when we ultimately send humans one day. So they are definitely paving the way. But Mars is very hard. Mars is very, very hard. Low Earth orbit is hard, and so is the moon. But Mars is significantly challenging. And if you think about how far away, we'll go to the next slide. So when you think about the challenge of getting humans to Mars and building the systems that are needed for Mars, I talked about how it's important for us to test out a lot of these systems and capabilities in low Earth orbit. And one of the key reasons for that is if something goes wrong or we have an emergency and you need to come home, it's only 3 hours. And so, we can bring the crew home, we can address whatever issues they might have had and troubleshoot those. Same thing, it's more challenging at the moon. It's a 3-day return if something goes wrong. But, we can still, it's manageable. But when you send humans to Mars, and if something goes wrong, it would take 9 months to bring the crew back. And so that's why we need to practice as much as possible, use the moon as a dress rehearsal for these missions to Mars, because we're going to be going from 250 miles at the International Space Station all the way someday to 39 million miles at Mars. And so that's why it's critical that we have the Artemis program to help us learn how to live and work in deep space before we venture on that journey to Mars. And so, the round trip to Mars will be about 2,000 times as far as the round trip distance to the moon. And it'll take about 2 to 3 years. Because, it takes a long time for us to get there. We want to make sure that we can spend a significant amount of time exploring once we get there. And so, but ultimately, ultimately, the goal for Mars is the same as the goal that we have for the moon. We'd like to establish a sustainable human presence in deep space, and we hope someday that we will be able to do that. And so this is a pretty cool picture. So this shows you, kind of the view of Earth from Mars. And so this is what the first crew would see, hopefully someday, when we send humans to the surface. And so, we're going to continue to work with our partners to achieve that. But, I wanted to also take some time and talk to you about, how to, all the different things that you can do to be part of our space program. And so I told you I started I was studying history, and really wasn't sure what I was going to do with that. And I quickly learned that NASA has a history office. Actually, most government agencies has a history office, which I wasn't aware of. But NASA is like any business or organization. They have all types of careers that are not just being an astronaut or a rocket scientist. And so, we have construction workers and welding technicians. You can work on airplanes, flight controllers. I talked about the work that we need to do with food and nutrition. So we've got nutritionists, we've got food scientists, all working on various aspects of what we're going to need to go back to the moon. We have doctors and lawyers and accountants, and all different types. Social media. NASA has one of the best social media in all of government, and it's run by a great team of social media experts. And so we've got a whole team of that, if that's something that you wanted to be a part of. Graphics designers. All of these pictures and the beautiful graphics in my presentation were done by some of the talented artists that we have at NASA and graphic designers. Spacesuit designers. We need someone to help us design our spacesuits. You could be a scuba diver and work with our astronauts as they train underwater before their missions. And so there really is just an endless amount of ways that you can be part of the space program and work for NASA or another space industry company that doesn't require being a rocket scientist or an astronaut. Now, we love those. We'll take all the rocket scientists we can get, but just know that NASA is definitely accessible to you, and there's a place for you at NASA for sure. And so, exploration is a team sport. So we need great, enthusiastic people to come help us work and help us get back to the moon. We work with our international partners, like I mentioned, very closely, industry partners all over the country and all over the world. We work with universities all over the country and all over the world. So it's absolutely a team sport, and very excited about what the future brings and going back to the moon. So thank you very much for your time today, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you, Nicole. First thing I'd like to ask you is if you could tell our audience what a typical day is like for you. I mean, what kinds of things do you engage in your position?
Sure. So I work at the Marshall Space Flight Center. Oh, there's a little bit of, is it echoing on your side? Sorry.
It's not echoing here, no.
Okay, all right, I'll keep going. So I work at the Marshall Space Flight Center, so I'm the technical integration manager. So I unfortunately don't do any hands-on work. I'm not working in a lab or have my hands on a rocket. But a lot of my experience, like I said, was at NASA headquarters, where what NASA headquarters does, and a lot of my job now is taking the policy that the White House or Congress outlines for our space program and our national goals and objectives for space, and kind of translating those into how NASA can implement. And so, for instance, the White House or the administration says we want to send humans back to the moon, and tells NASA that is their goal. And so what I help do is take those policies, and then we look at what are our current capabilities, what technologies do we have, what systems do we need to achieve those goals. And so it's a lot of I would call it's policy implementation. And so working with our engineers, our mission planners, our space architects to help define those plans for future exploration. So kind of a day in a life for me. I'll be honest, it's a lot of phone calls and a lot of emails, but we're talking about space, and we're planning our future exploration missions. And so I'm also, a lot of NASA is still working from home, and so I'm working from home with the rest of a lot of the agency to kind of make sure that we keep our Artemis missions on track. And so in a day in the life is sitting behind the computer, but we're working on our exploration plans.
Okay, I'm going to see if you have a question out there, just raise your hand, and I'll come over with the microphone so Nicole can hear you. Got any brave questions out there? Look out from the stage. Any questions? I see a question, so I'm going to come out there. So Nicole, you're going to see me go off camera, but I'm still here. I promise. You're going to hear one of our audience ask you a question. So hold on. All right. What's your question?
When does NASA go back to the moon?
Okay.
When does NASA go back to the moon?
Yeah.
So right now we are targeting to send humans back to the surface of the moon in 2024. But like I said, it's very difficult and very challenging. And so NASA is working very hard to build those systems that are needed to get us back to the surface as quickly as possible. But we're hoping that it could be 2024. It will definitely be within the next few years for sure.
All right. More questions out there? Any of our audience? I see a hand up. Hold on, Nicole. It's coming.
Will we have a camp on Mars when we get there?
Will we have a what?
A camp on Mars when we get there?
Will we have a camp on Mars when we get there?
We will not have a camp on our first mission. So what we're going to do when we go to Mars is we will send a crew, and they will explore for the first time, and they'll take a lot of supplies with them. And so they will set up a very small camp that will allow them to explore and do some smaller missions. But each mission that we send will deliver a new piece of that camp. So we're going to have to deliver rovers and habitats and other types of supplies that they'll need. And so eventually we will have a camp on Mars, but not for the first mission.
Okay. Other questions out there? We had an expert, Nicole, on one of our programs a few weeks ago who used to work for NASA, now working for Blue Origin's program. And they were saying that the capsule, when it lands in the ocean, the seawater is so corrosive, it makes it difficult to reuse the capsules because seawater doesn't agree with a lot of electronics. And so they're using the technology to try to use capsules to land on the ground rather than on the ocean. What does NASA think about going for a ground landing as opposed to ocean?
I mean, I think that would be incredible. Any way that we can learn how to reuse our spacecraft, it's more affordable and it makes it better, for our future sustainability of these missions. But it's very challenging. And it's incredibly difficult because the speed at which those spacecraft are returning to Earth. And so that would be, if we could get there someday, I think that NASA would definitely be supportive of that. And if you look at, what SpaceX has been able to do, where they've been landing their booster segments, and then I think Blue Origin has also landed and reused. That's kind of a step in that direction. And so, yeah, I think that NASA would 100% support that if we get there someday.
All right, I see a question way over here. I was about to go mine our virtual audience, but I see another hand up in the audience. So let me come over here. So hold on one second. Here we go, Nicole.
Thank you for speaking with us today. My son would like to know if NASA will be building a high-powered telescope on the moon.
NASA right now doesn't have any plans to build, as far as I'm aware, a telescope on the surface of the moon, but I know that our scientific community would absolutely be interested in something like that, especially kind of on the farther side of the moon where you have less interference with the sun and other communications interference. And so currently there aren't any plans right now today to do that in the near term, but I can see that being something that in the future would be something our scientists would want to do.
Cool. Thank you. Questions down here? I'm going to go up and see. Oh, I have one more question before I get to my virtual audience. Yep.
How much money does the SLS cost?
A lot. I don't know the exact cost of the SLS today. So it's been in development for a very long time. And so, NASA's budget, I believe, is about $23 billion. It's close to that. It's in the low to mid 20 billions. And the SLS rocket has been in development for quite some time. And so it's several $billion a year, I'll say, but because I don't know the exact number.
Thank you. I'm just going to mine a few questions from our virtual audience before we run out of time. Is NASA currently training astronauts now to be in the new going to the moon program?
Yes, they are. And so a lot of the astronauts that you see in those videos are the Artemis astronauts that have been selected to prepare for Artemis 2 and beyond. And so I believe the announcement, I think it was in 2020 is when they did their Artemis announcement. I'm not exactly sure, but yes, there we go. Thank you, Patricia. So this is our Artemis class of astronauts. And so I don't think that any have been assigned to any missions yet, just because we've still got a few more years. But they are all training and preparing for those future missions.
Next question is, I'm in high school now, and I want to be an astronaut. How do I go about becoming an astronaut?
Yeah, absolutely. So I would say you need to study. Your math and science are critical. And, when we go back to the moon, into deep space and beyond, we are going to need more than just rocket scientists, right? If we're going to need doctors also on these missions. And so, studying a technical field, either becoming an engineer or a scientist, will put you on that right path. You need to absolutely stay in school, keep your test scores up, and get involved in the space program today. You don't have to wait until you graduate school. Look for internships at NASA and other opportunities to just learn more about the space program. That'll help you make sure you're on track.
Cool. Next question is, does the International Space Station have a role in the future with the new Artemis program?
Absolutely. So the International Space Station is critical. Not only, the key thing that we are using the space station for now is to test out those systems and capabilities that we need for deep space. So for instance, our life support systems. So the life support systems on the space station were meant for short duration missions, but what we've been doing is upgrading a lot of those life support systems to learn how to recycle water, how to recycle the air, so that we don't have to bring any additional with us to deep space. So we're using the space station as a test bed for these exploration capabilities, so that we can test them out close to Earth before we deploy them in our new systems for Mars.
And speaking of Mars, how many people are planning to be part of the Mars crew?
So right now, the plans for Mars are very conceptual. We're just looking at lots of options for that, but the crew would likely be between 4 and 6 astronauts. But that's still kind of to be determined, depending on the spacecraft that we ultimately send.
Cool. And when will the first potential rocket launch date be released?
So right now, our space launch system is planned to be launched in December of this year. And so we will stand by for that, hopefully, in December.
Okay. And so, let's see. Let me just look through these questions here. And so is the Mars mission, the moon mission, considered an international effort, or is it just purely NASA by themselves?
It's absolutely an international effort. And so for instance, the Gateway is being built with our international partners as part of the Artemis program. Yes, and so thank you. The Artemis Accords. So this is NASA worked with our international community to sign what are called the Artemis Accords, bringing together our international partners to peacefully explore space, to develop the systems that are needed. So right now we're working with our Japanese partners to develop a rover for the surface. Our European partners are helping us with a habitat for the Gateway. Canadian partners are delivering a robotic arm, and so it's absolutely an international effort.
Cool. And where do you hope to be in 10 years from now with NASA?
Oh, wow. 10 years from now with NASA. I hope to be working on one of these programs that we're operating on the moon. And I hope to be working to helping keep that be sustainable. I guess I haven't thought about it too much, but hopefully I'll be working on these programs.
All right. Any more questions out there from our in-house audience or virtual audience? Well, Nicole, thank you so much for your time this afternoon. It's been a pleasure hosting you here at TELUS, and I hope in your travels out from Huntsville you'll make it out to Cartersville. It's not that far, and come see us. Thank you so much for your time. Please thank Nicole.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you, Nicole.